Welcome to What Do You Want to Do, the show that will hopefully help you figure out what you want to do in life or reconnect you to what you love doing. Each show has a guest who is doing what they want to do, whether it's in their career or in addition to their regular job. Most importantly, we want to help you realize that no matter your age, you too can do what you want to do if you have the will to do it. Now here's your host, Leonard Kaplan.
This week's special guest is Evan Ginzburg, the associate producer of The Wrestler and of 350 Days, and he has a new book coming out. And Evan, you are a great guest to have because you are a prime example of someone who relentlessly has pursued the arts, if not as a full-time career, as a sideline. And you also help a lot of artists get their exposure, which is very important because a lot of independent artists never get their due, and they get ignored like the politicians from the small parties that will never get elected president. Or people think that they'll never get elected president. So you serve a very big role in that regard. So Evan, how did you get into the arts, and what keeps you enthusiastic, and why is this such a passion for you?
Well, what I have learned in 30 plus years in the arts is one thing always leads to another. In the pre-internet days, I was involved with zines, and I did a pro wrestling zine, and one of my readers was a radio host on a 50,000 watt New York station. WBAI FM, part of Pacifica, world famous left-leaning station, very political. And he read my zine and he was like, Evan, why don't you come do radio? So from radio, having the power of a 50,000 watt station behind me, I started calling up famous musicians, famous actors, famous wrestlers, etc., so on. And that led to me being an agent in the wrestling business, where I would book legends who headline Madison Square Garden for autograph appearances and, private parties and such. And I was doing an autograph signing with Nikolai Volkov and Johnny Valiant. I know this isn't a wrestling show, so
That's okay.
These are main event legends who headlined arenas around the world. And we're sitting there at this wrestling store, and the executive producer of The Wrestler, his best friend approaches us. The executive producer is the money guy. The associate producer is the wrestling guy. It's a big difference. So the executive producer's buddy approaches us and he says, we're working on this script. We're working on this project called The Wrestler, and we think you guys would be perfect. Would you like to meet with Darren Aronofsky? Do you know who he is? And I said, I do. Darren Aronofsky's, done tremendous films, The Fountain, Requiem for a Dream. This was before The Wrestler. I was a fan, and I said, sure, we'd love to meet. And the guy gives us his card, and I really don't think much of it because you get 50 cards when you're doing appearances, and 9 out of 10 you never hear back from. But next thing you know, there we were meeting with Darren Aronofsky, the executive producer Scott Franklin, the screenwriter, etc., so on. And I had these legendary wrestlers with me, and we hit it off. I mean, Johnny and Nikolai were regaling them with stories, and they were charming, funny, and next thing you know, Evan, would you like to be the associate producer on The Wrestler? And I'd be honored. So one thing always leads to another, and from that, I got offered this documentary, 350 Days, which we're very proud of. And one thing, like I said, you got to be in it to win it. And but like yourself, I've always kept my hand in teaching. Teaching is a steady paycheck.
Right.
Steady paycheck.
Yeah. Right. No, that's the truth. Now, so you did not really get back into the arts until you were a little older. Is that fair to say? Were you
Well, it
doing anything
depends.
like
It
that?
depends what your definition of the arts is. I mean, zine writing is still writing. It's an art. It's not on the level of, the wrestler where Mickey Rourke won,
Right.
the Golden Globe, but and where we were opening night at the New York Film Festival. But it's all arts related.
So zine, define a zine for those of people who don't know.
Sure, a zine is a self-published quote unquote magazine, but generally smaller,
I
more
see.
primitive. Today they're almost a lost breed because the internet, you could reach a lot more people faster, immediately. You could post something and in minutes, seconds, you could have a response.
Right.
But before the internet, there were a lot of zines and
It's funny. I never heard that term, but I figured that it meant magazine, but I knew it meant something a little bit smaller.
self-published magazine.
Right, right. Now, some of the publications that we have on the internet, like newsletters and blogs, can they be considered zines as well, or no?
Well, a zine is something physical. So a blog
Okay.
would be the internet version of a zine.
Right.
You're pouring your
Okay.
heart out passionately about
Okay.
whatever the subject may be.
Okay.
Somebody could be writing about music. Somebody could be writing about, great film. Somebody could be writing about grindhouse film.
Mhm.
Whatever your thing is, there's a blog or content that, there's an audience for it.
Did you get a lot of support from your family and friends when you told them that you were going to be working with these people on these movies?
Yeah. Um, just knowing the movie business, people will like protect yourself because
Hmm.
it's a tough business and it's a ruthless business. And but Darren Aronofsky's an honorable guy. He's an
Hmm.
artist. He's an
Hmm.
artist. But there's been a lot of tragic stories with creative bookkeeping and such where
Right.
artists have lost everything and never seen a dime. So it's the movie business. You have to
Hmm.
know the business side of it also.
Now, you, like myself, have done a cable TV show, a radio show, and you have one now. It's a podcast, partially wrestling and partially entertainment in the music world. You've done that for many years. And how has that gone for you? What you keep coming back to it, so it must
Yeah.
be doing pretty
Um,
well.
just like we're doing right now, you bring on people that you respect and they pour their hearts out. And for independent artists who rarely get the recognition they deserve,
Hmm.
it's very meaningful to them to have somebody say, please perform on my TV show, please perform on my radio show, please
Hmm.
perform on my podcast, whatever the case may be. And for many of these young artists or even older artists, they'll say, you're the first person that ever interviewed me. You're the first person that had me on. And it's very meaningful to them. And like I said, I started with WBAI FM in New York about 1991 or so. So I'm
Hmm.
at this almost 30 years. And sometimes somebody will, reach out to me on the internet and I did your show 25 years ago. I did your show 20 years ago. And it's nice that it means something to them because a lot of these artists never get the recognition that's due to them. I mean, some of these guys are tremendous artists. I always do this, and believe me, it's not statistically accurate, but it's just for example. Whatever the field is, radio, movies, whatever it may be, singing, dancing. I always say 90% of the people will never make a living at it.
Hmm.
90%. Another 5% will somehow squeak by And then you have that small percentage that are really going to make it, where people know their names.
Sure.
So any arts that you're involved in is very tough. I mean, you're a teacher. My favorite book is called The House on Mango Street, Sandra Cisneros. Beautiful book. It's one of those rare books you could read in junior high or in college. I taught it in adult ESL classes. It's just a book that's so magical, you could use it all different levels. Okay. So what has Sandra Cisneros done all these years? She's taught writing in college. It's a steady paycheck.
Right.
I mean, if you understand book publishing, you know, the writer gets 10%, unless it's Stephen King or, you know, a star.
Right.
So if a book is $10, you're getting $1. You're not getting rich off this book.
Sure.
So you have somebody who's a magnificent writer, read by God knows how many people, and she's made a living as a college professor. And you know, it's the nature of the beast. So we did The Wrestler, it took 7 years. We did 350 Days, it took 6 years. What does that mean? It means sometimes you're waiting 6 or 7 years to get paid.
Sure.
So you better have, you know, your finances in order, because you're not going to make it otherwise. So there's no shame in it. There's
no, and that's an important phrase that you just said, because there are some people, one in particular who shall be named nameless, that you and I both know, that we kind of defriended. I think you know who I mean. That people think is a perception that if you're not making money at it, you're a sucker. You know what I mean? And I resent that, and I'm sure you resent it as well. And part of the purpose of this show is to let people know that if you have a talent, and just because you have a 9-to-5 job doesn't mean you should abandon completely these dreams that you had to express yourself, to give exposure to the things that you can do that maybe nobody else can do. You know, just because you're not making $1 million doesn't mean that it's a waste.
I've done a half dozen movies. I didn't get rich from any of them, but when I'm gone, trust me, 100 years from now, people will watch Mickey Rourke in The Wrestler.
Yeah.
And I acted in The Wrestler. I'm in there.
That's awesome.
So Mickey Rourke, when he says, I'm just a broken down piece of meat to his daughter in that poignant scene, you know, that's like Brando and On the Waterfront. People will watch this 100 years from now. And that's really the payoff, more so than the, you know, whatever you paid to do it, which is Mickey Rourke didn't get rich from The Wrestler. Marissa Tomei didn't get rich from The Wrestler. So I certainly didn't either, but we did get paid, and it's a beautiful piece that, you know, will stand the test of time. And let me just say something. Many jazz masters, I'm a jazz buff, they teach. They teach, you know, they're not making a fortune off their gigs. And they might be making more money doing one-on-one, you know, teaching, and you're learning from a master. You're sitting at the foot of genius.
Right.
And, you know, they advertise publicly. There's no shame that they have a side income. You're still an artist. And
now you and I have both taught for many years. I've taught little kids, I've taught older people. And one thing that I always see is that while we're doing what we're doing, say a dramatic thing, I see these amazing performances, because for that moment, they are inspired and they're doing what they never got to do before. And that's really something to see. And what I want to happen, maybe somebody happens to listen to this podcast, I want people to look back in their memories and maybe remember a moment like that and say, gee, you know, maybe I'll pick up the guitar again. Maybe I'll try acting in theater or something on the side, and just revive that part of themselves that they think maybe is dead, or they think it's childish. people just have these preconceived notions, maybe that their parents or grandparents or other well-meaning but misguided relatives will say negatively about the arts.
Well, the other thing is, as a teacher, you've taught probably thousands of kids over your career, and one day, one or two or three or whatever the case may be, are going to make it, and they're going to create art.
You know, I've seen these things happen. And so if there's any message, it can happen to anyone. It can happen anywhere. It doesn't matter where you're from or, you know, what you think, what other people think. It's if you apply yourself, it is possible to go all the way. And if you don't go all the way, you can still stay and still get to do what you want. Well, Evan, thank you very much for joining me on this show, and I appreciate it very much.
My pleasure.
And is there anything else you'd like to add in this vein?
Yes. One of my favorite movies is called Once, about street musicians in Europe. It's a beautiful film, and the band, the Swell Season, were the actors in the film, and they won Best Song at the Academy Award, and they said in front of 1 billion people, create art. Create art.
Right.
And I repeat this ad nauseum. You know, you're doing a podcast. Somebody may watch this 200 years from now. You don't know.
Right.
You don't know.
That's right.
And I always say, follow your heart and follow your muse, follow your passion. And we were at the New York Film Festival opening night after working 7 years on The Wrestler. There was a spontaneous standing ovation. And I just said, this is the best night of my life. Best night of my life. Because not only did you create something, it was acknowledged. So artists, whether 5 people acknowledge it or 5 billion, you know, create art.
I agree. And on that note, thank you very much, Evan, for joining us. And thank you all for listening and watching, as the case may be. And we'll see you next time. And until then, what do you want to do?